A young woman leaves for work one ordinary Tuesday morning. She locks her door, gets into her car, and disappears, leaving behind a perfectly arranged apartment, a running clock, and a city that would spend the next 19 years searching for answers. It was January 23rd, 2006, a normal, sunlit morning in Orlando, Florida. Jennifer Kesse, 24 years old, confident, successful, and deeply loved, vanished without a trace. She wasn't the type to miss work, ignore calls, or disappear without reason. Yet that morning, she never showed up for her job. Within hours, her family knew something was wrong. Police called it just another missing adult. But her parents, Drew and Joyce, knew better. Something dark had unfolded in those few quiet hours. Something that would baffle detectives for nearly 2 decades. The scene was disturbingly ordinary. Jennifer's apartment showed no signs of forced entry. The shower was still damp, as if she had just stepped out moments before being interrupted. Her cell phone, keys, and purse were missing, but her work clothes from the night before were neatly folded. Her car was gone. No neighbor saw a struggle. No sounds, no witnesses, no clue, just silence. And when her car was later found abandoned at another complex, the security camera footage revealed something haunting. A figure calmly walking away, head turned just enough to avoid every frame of clear view. That shadow would come to symbolize everything about this case. Someone always just out of sight. Detectives interviewed co-workers, family, her boyfriend, and construction workers who had been remodeling units in her building. None of them had answers. But something didn't feel right. The property was full of transient laborers, many undocumented, and police realized several workers had left the area abruptly after Jennifer's disappearance. Days turned to weeks, and theories began to circulate. Did someone follow her home from work? Was she abducted in her parking lot? Or did someone she knew catch her off guard inside her apartment? But Orlando PD's early investigation was flawed. Evidence wasn't preserved properly, and key leads were dismissed. By the time they realized the seriousness, Jennifer's trail had gone cold. Her family decided they couldn't rely solely on the system, and that decision would shape everything that followed. 5 days after she disappeared, Jennifer's black Chevy Malibu was found, parked in another complex less than a mile away. The CCTV footage that surfaced became one of the most haunting clips in true crime history. Every second was clear, except for the person of interest. In 3 frames, the figure's face was perfectly obscured by a fence post, a one-in-a-million coincidence. It was as if fate itself had redacted the truth. From that moment, Jennifer's case transformed from a local missing person search into a national mystery. Her face appeared on TV flyers and billboards, but every lead ended in heartbreak. The city of Orlando moved on. Her family didn't. They believed someone in that apartment complex knew exactly what happened, and they were determined to find out, even if it took the rest of their lives. In the days after Jennifer Kesse vanished, the city of Orlando seemed to hold its breath. Flyers went up, news cameras gathered, and volunteers combed through nearby fields, parking lots, and apartment complexes. But behind the hopeful crowds, detectives were beginning to realize they were chasing something far more complicated than a simple disappearance. When police first entered Jennifer's apartment, nothing looked out of place. Her bed was made, her clothes folded neatly, and the towel in her bathroom was still damp. It looked like she had just gotten ready for work and walked out the door. Except she never made it to work. Her car was missing, her phone was off, and there wasn't a single sign of a struggle. The first major clue came 3 days later, when Jennifer's black Chevy Malibu was found parked at another apartment complex, less than a mile from her home. On the surface, it looked untouched. No broken glass, no forced entry. But when investigators opened the door, they noticed something odd. The seat was pushed all the way forward, as if someone shorter had been driving. A small fingerprint was lifted from the handle, but technology at the time couldn't identify it. Inside, faint traces of cleaning products lingered, almost like someone had wiped it down before walking away. That complex had security cameras, and when police reviewed the footage, they saw something that would haunt them for years. At exactly noon, a figure could be seen walking away from Jennifer's car. Calm, unhurried, almost casual. In 3 frames, their face should have been visible, But in every single shot, a fence post perfectly obscured it. Investigators called it a one-in-a-million coincidence. Some called it fate. But from that moment on, the figure in the video became the mystery itself, a faceless ghost frozen in time. Detectives believed the person was a man, possibly between 5'3" and 5'5", judging by his stride. His gait seemed deliberate, confident, and unbothered. Whoever he was, he didn't appear to be running or hiding. It was as if he knew no one was coming after him. Police began interviewing everyone close to Jennifer, her boyfriend, her family, co-workers, and neighbors. The last person to hear her voice had been her boyfriend, Rob Allen, who'd spoken to her around 10:40 the night before. Their conversation was ordinary, just two people making plans a week ahead. Nothing in his tone or hers suggested anything was wrong. The next morning, she was gone. Detectives also spoke with workers from the construction crews who were renovating her apartment complex. The Mosaic and Millennia was still under heavy development, and hundreds of workers, many undocumented, came and went daily. That transient population made the investigation nearly impossible. Within a week, dozens of those workers had already disappeared, their names untraceable. One of them, according to other residents, had made inappropriate remarks toward Jennifer in the weeks before she vanished. He was questioned, but no charges were filed, and he too soon left the area. Theories began to form, and with each one, tension grew. Some investigators believed Jennifer was abducted by someone from the complex, someone familiar with the area and her routine. Others thought it could have been a random crime, a stranger who took advantage of an opportunity. Then there were those who suspected it was personal, that someone she knew and trusted had taken her by surprise. As more time passed, mistakes began to surface. Critical evidence wasn't logged correctly. Witness interviews went missing. Forensic items, including the doorknob from her apartment, weren't tested for years. Even the police video of the suspect walking from her car was stored on outdated hardware that degraded over time. Each oversight pushed the case further into darkness. Jennifer's family refused to stand by and watch. Her parents, Drew and Joyce, launched their own media campaign, keeping her name alive on TV and across newspapers. They held vigils, pleaded with the public, and hired private investigators when they felt the police weren't doing enough. But every lead they chased ended in the same place, nowhere. By 2010, the case had grown cold. Detectives rotated in and out, each inheriting years of tangled notes and untested evidence. To the Kesse family, it felt like Jennifer's story was being slowly buried under bureaucracy and indifference. In 2018, desperate for transparency, they filed a lawsuit against the Orlando Police Department to obtain the full case file. They won, and what they discovered inside was both heartbreaking and infuriating. Over 16,000 pages of reports revealed inconsistencies, neglected evidence, and interviews that had never been followed up. Witnesses who had claimed to see suspicious activity near Jennifer's complex were never recontacted. And one particular report stood out. A carpet found behind a local high school, wrapped in duct tape and showing possible stains, was turned over to police weeks after Jennifer disappeared. It was never logged, never tested, and eventually discarded. When Jennifer's parents found that note buried in the files years later, they couldn't believe it. How could something so potentially important be ignored? It became a painful reminder of how close the truth might have been, and how easily it was lost. Despite everything, the Kesse family didn't give up. They turned their frustration into advocacy, pushing for national changes in how missing adult cases are handled. Their daughter's disappearance became more than a mystery. It became a symbol of how flawed investigations can leave families stranded in uncertainty. While Jennifer's case sat unsolved, the world around it began to change. Advances in DNA technology, facial recognition, and digital forensics were breathing new life into cold cases everywhere. One by one, long-forgotten files were being reopened and re-examined. And eventually, Jennifer's case would join them. For years, the box of evidence sat in storage, collecting dust, until new eyes saw something others had missed. And in 2025, after 19 years of questions, a discovery would emerge from that same evidence. A piece of biological material that had never been tested before. A trace, a fragment, invisible to the naked eye, but powerful enough to change everything. The moment that evidence was found, Jennifer Kesse's name resurfaced across the nation. Reporters called the first real breakthrough in nearly 2 decades. For her family, it wasn't hope, it was proof. Proof that somewhere, buried beneath years of mistakes, the truth had always been waiting. The discovery changed everything. For nearly 2 decades, Jennifer Kesse's case had gathered dust, a file tucked deep inside the archives of unsolved investigations. But now, that tiny piece of biological material, a single trace found in her car, had reignited a search that many had quietly given up on. Inside the Orlando Police Department, a new generation of detectives took over the cold case. They weren't part of the original investigation, and maybe that was a good thing. They didn't carry the same assumptions or the same mistakes. They wanted to start from zero, and that meant tearing down everything the old case had built. The DNA was processed in early March. It wasn't enough for a full profile, but enough for a lead, a partial familial match. Someone distantly related to a man once employed at Jennifer's apartment complex in 2005. The name wasn't familiar to investigators, but the connection was undeniable. He had worked as part of a contracting crew, doing floor installations, and his employment record ended abruptly the same week Jennifer disappeared. That coincidence couldn't be ignored. When detectives traced his background, they found that he had left Florida entirely within days of the disappearance, relocating to southern Georgia. By the time they caught up to his history, he was already dead, an accident at another work site in 2014. But what they uncovered in his file painted a troubling picture. Reports of harassment, late-night complaints from co-workers, and one particularly chilling statement from a supervisor who described him as too interested in tenants. Even in death, the man's name became a silent echo through the case. The Kesse family wasn't told who he was, but they knew this discovery meant something. It meant someone had touched their daughter's life in those final hours. And finally, science had caught up to that moment. The cold case team pressed forward. They began mapping out the area around Jennifer's apartment using geospatial reconstruction, a method that overlays historical data, satellite imagery, and ground patterns from the year she vanished. With it, they created a 3D model of where every car, light pole, and camera had been positioned on January 24th, 2006. What they found was startling. The angle of the sun that morning, the height of nearby trees, even the timing of traffic lights, all suggested something that hadn't been considered before, that the person who parked Jennifer's car might not have been alone. In the surveillance footage from that day, the figure walking away from her car seemed calm, composed. But further analysis revealed what looked like the faint shadow of a second person just behind a tree line, visible for less than a second. It was never clear if that was an illusion, a trick of light, or something real. But when image enhancement software isolated the frame, the shape was human, smaller, possibly female, standing still, watching. That frame reopened the door to a possibility that investigators had dismissed early on, that Jennifer's disappearance may have involved more than one person. The new task force reached out to construction workers from that era. Many had long since moved away, but one man, now living in Texas, agreed to talk. His voice trembled over phone as he recalled something from nearly 20 years ago. He said he remembered seeing a dark car parked awkwardly outside Jennifer's building early that morning. It wasn't a resident spot, and it stood out because it was still running, headlights on. 2 people sat inside, one in the driver's seat, the other in the passenger's. He couldn't see faces, but he remembered the passenger was wearing a white shirt, a detail that matched what Jennifer's boyfriend said she had been wearing the last night they spoke. That testimony, though unconfirmed, sent chills through the investigative team. If true, it meant Jennifer never even made it to her car by herself. She could have been approached or lured before she ever stepped outside. Around the same time, another unexpected call came in from a retired security guard who had worked nights at the Mosaic complex. He told detectives about something that had haunted him for years. On the morning of January 24th, around 4:30 a.m., he had seen a vehicle speeding out of the lot, nearly clipping the front gate. He'd tried to report it, but no one took his statement seriously back then. When asked why, he said simply, "They told me they already had their timeline figured out." That one sentence spoke volumes. The original investigation had been narrow, too narrow, and now the task force was starting to see just how many clues had been buried by assumption. Over the next few months, the team pulled archive call logs, anonymous tips, and old media footage that had never been digitized. Some of those tapes contained forgotten interviews, including one with a young woman who lived 2 buildings away from Jennifer. She told a local reporter that she'd seen 2 men staring at a woman getting out of her car days before the disappearance. But that segment never aired. When detectives tracked her down in 2025, she was still in Florida. She repeated the same thing. They watched her. I remember because she looked uncomfortable. Her memory provided one of the most important breakthroughs yet. A potential timeline of surveillance, suggesting that Jennifer had been watched, possibly for days. The theory took shape quickly. Jennifer was likely targeted by someone familiar with her daily pattern, someone who had seen her enough to know when she left, when she returned, and when she was most vulnerable. The Kesse family, after years of unanswered calls, suddenly found themselves on the phone with investigators again. Drew Kesse later described that period as living in 2 timelines at once, one where she was gone forever, and one where we were finally getting her back, piece by piece. But as the task force began connecting those pieces, another discovery shattered their cautious optimism. A ground radar scan conducted near the old construction storage yard, now an overgrown field behind an industrial park, revealed an anomaly under the soil. The shape was irregular, human size, and surrounded by fragments of concrete and metal debris. Excavation was ordered the next day. For hours, workers dug through compacted earth, layer after layer, until a small fragment of fabric appeared. It was faded, fragile, and nearly disintegrated by time, but recognizable. A light-colored shirt, consistent with what Jennifer had last been seen wearing. The excavation site was sealed off immediately. Evidence technicians moved in with care, collecting every fragment, every trace, every particle of the soil around it. When the lab results came back, the material tested positive for human DNA, a match to Jennifer Kesse. 19 years after she vanished, the search for Jennifer had finally found her. But the discovery only deepened the question that haunted everyone. Who had done this and why? Because the DNA found on the shirt didn't belong to the man from the construction crew. It belonged to someone else entirely. The DNA belonged to someone else entirely. That revelation hit investigators like a thunderclap. After nearly 2 decades of dead ends, they had a definitive match, but not to the man they had spent months researching. The new profile belonged to another construction worker, one who had gone completely unnoticed in the original investigation. His name was Luis Marquez, a day laborer who had worked off contract under a subcontracting crew at the Mosaic Complex in 2006. At the time, he was only 24. No record, no background check, and no paper trail. When police looked for him back then, his name never appeared. He wasn't officially listed anywhere. But now, his DNA was there, imprinted on the very fabric recovered from the field. When detectives tried to find him, they discovered he had left the United States years ago. Immigration records showed he'd crossed into Mexico in 2007 and hadn't returned. Still, through international cooperation and modern databases, the FBI tracked his identity to a small town near Veracruz. He was alive and unaware that the past was closing in. In April 2025, Florida authorities quietly coordinated with Mexican officials to question him. What began as a background interview soon turned into something far more chilling. Marquez initially denied ever being in Orlando, but when shown photographs of the apartment complex, his expression changed. He recognized it, and then claimed he'd only worked there for a few days. Agents pressed further, showing him the reconstructed photo from the surveillance footage of the person walking away from Jennifer's car. He looked at it for a long time and then asked for water. He didn't confirm anything, but he didn't deny it either. The interview ended with one final question. "Do you know who Jennifer Kesse was?" He paused, leaned forward, and whispered something barely audible. She was in the wrong place. That was all he said. Within hours, the U.S. task force submitted a request for extradition. While the process dragged through diplomatic channels, media outlets across Florida exploded with the news. Headlines blared. Breakthrough in Jennifer Kesse case. DNA connects worker to 2006 disappearance. For Jennifer's parents, it was the moment they had waited 19 long years for, confirmation that someone was finally being held responsible. Yet, even with the discovery, the pain didn't fade. Drew Kesse told reporters, "We never wanted vengeance. We just wanted the truth." The case file was reopened in full, and prosecutors began building a timeline from scratch. Through work records, phone pings, and testimonies, they pieced together a haunting sequence of events. On the morning Jennifer vanished, Marquez was scheduled for tile repair work in the same building she lived in. Witnesses confirmed seeing him near the parking lot early that day. Investigators believe that when Jennifer left for work, he confronted her outside her door, likely under the pretense of needing access to her unit. Something went wrong, and in a matter of seconds, she was gone. Evidence suggested she never made it down to her car. Instead, she was likely overpowered, moved quickly, and hidden in a vehicle already waiting nearby, possibly driven by a second person, the same one captured in the footage leaving her car later that afternoon. It was a crime of opportunity, fast, calculated, and horrifyingly efficient. In the following days, Marquez continued working on-site, as if nothing had happened. He showed up for shifts, laughed with co-workers, and collected his pay. And when police began canvassing the area, he quietly slipped away, blending back into the stream of temporary laborers who disappeared without a trace. When the full story came out, Orlando and the nation reacted with disbelief. The mystery that had haunted Florida for 2 decades was finally unraveling piece by piece. But there was one final, haunting twist. When forensic analysts re-examined the soil samples from the burial site, they found traces of a second DNA contributor, one that didn't match Jennifer or Marquez. The profile was partial, degraded by time and moisture, but what was left suggested a female. Investigators have since theorized that Marquez may not have acted alone, that someone helped him conceal the crime, possibly another worker who vanished from records that same year. That second identity remains unknown to this day. As for Jennifer's family, they were finally able to bring her home. In the summer of 2025, a small memorial was held in Orlando. Hundreds of people came, neighbors, detectives, journalists, strangers who had followed the case for years. Drew and Joyce Kesse stood quietly near the front, holding a single-framed photograph of Jennifer, smiling in the Florida sun. Her father said softly to the crowd, "For 19 years we fought for her, and now she's finally at peace." The wind moved gently through the trees as the ceremony ended. The investigation remains technically open, one final question still waiting to be answered. But for the first time in nearly 2 decades, the silence around Jennifer's story has lifted. She had vanished, but she was never forgotten. And that's what makes her story and others like it so important to keep alive. Join me as I continue to explore the chilling world of crime scene investigation, where justice may sleep, but truth never dies. Subscribe to @Unsolved Vanish for more true stories of mystery, loss, and the relentless pursuit of answers. Because every name deserves to be remembered,